Hello, and welcome to the Brubacher and Beyond podcast, where we are shaping the world we live in. I'm Sztenderowicz, host of the podcast, and I am here today with Keith Brubacher, president.
Good morning. Keith Brubacher here. Glad to be a part of this. My role is leading the business, and I'm responsible primarily for strategy, for culture, for relationships, and a number of other things that fill up a very busy week. Glad to be here today.
Good morning. I'm Henry Landis. I'm with Delaware Valley Family Business Center, and it's been my privilege to serve family businesses for about 35 years. And one of those businesses, I'm proud to say, is Brubacher Excavating.
Good morning. My name is Peter Kraybill. I'm an attorney with Gibbel, Kraybill, and Hess. I'm licensed to practice law in Pennsylvania and regularly represent clients that are organizations, companies, their owners, and their managers. With Gibbel, Kraybill, and Hess, our mission is to empower individuals, nurture community, and promote justice with integrity and compassion. And I work to do that with our clients, and I strive to do that in my relationships.
So on the podcast today, woes and wins of family businesses, or this could be wins and woes of family businesses. The podcast today we're going to be talking about is how to find outside counsel, or if you are in the thought process of your succession plan of the company and what that might look like. And so this is a topic with a lot of the generation that'll be aging out, and either family does want to be part of the business or maybe not part of the business, and what that would look like. And I would think, Henry, all of those are different for everybody, right? And I think with our pre-podcast recording, what I think of first after talking with you and Peter, though, it's about the family. And with that, though, can you explain what your company does and how you help other companies prepare for that succession plan?
Well, thank you, Chris. I grew up in a family business many years ago. And I did not work in that business as an adult. I did as an adolescent. And about 15 years later, I came back to start a business that was serving family businesses to help them to thrive as both a business and as a family. And we have, over the years, been very interested in finding ways to bring advisors into a team structure so that they can get full support for various kinds of needs that they may have. So I'm delighted to do this with Peter because we work a lot with attorneys, with accountants, with therapists, with financial planners, and they're all very important. And one of the things that we do is try to not corral them, because I think some people refer to advisors being like cats, and it's hard to herd cats. But my experience has been that advisors really are eager to work with other advisors in the service of families.
Well, thank you for that. I'll go to our next guest right now. Peter, if you can explain a little bit what you and your firm do.
So we would advise families, we would advise businesses and other organizations. And generally what we're trying to frame are the structures that would be in writing, particularly governing documents for an entity, whether those are articles and bylaws, or whether those would be shareholders agreements or other owners agreements about the understanding the owners have in their relation to each other, and when and how they can disassociate from the business or sell or transfer or gift their interests in the business. So with families, that often comes down to certain values or assumptions that are in place that they would bring to the conversation. And so very much we would try to understand the perspective of our clients and what are their motivations, what are their priorities, and then we would frame our advice around those priorities. So if they have governing documents in place, in other words, their basic homework is already done, then usually the next step is to understand what advisors are involved. And as Henry mentioned, we're eager to cooperate with other advisors. We're mainly trying to ensure that relevant tasks are addressed, and I believe that it generally is wisdom to have more than one set of eyes on a new frame of agreement or of a new document or a new understanding, whether that's a shareholders agreement, whether that's a business succession plan, whether that is a policy or other framework for the family to grapple with these issues, our intention usually is to end with a written version of whatever their understanding is, because memories change, people pass away, and it's always wise to have a documented place that people can reference. This is what we understood then, when tempers were cool and heads were level.
Okay. So Keith, do you want to give us any background or your thoughts on this subject?
Yeah, so maybe a first explanation on how I came to know these two gentlemen that are guests on our podcast here today. So we were sitting around this very table, or one similar to it, in this very room. I think in 2004, and my father was asking my siblings and I what our level of interest was in stewarding the business for the next generation. And so we thought about that, and we came back with our responses. And then we were working with Peter's father, Elvin Kraybill, to document some of those agreements, as he just referred to. And along the way, he said, now I can do all the fine work that a good attorney can possibly do, and I can document all of this, but I can't help make it work. He said, there's people that specialize in helping family businesses work through transitions, prepare for that, and work alongside them. I heard of this guy, I think I worked with him once a long time ago, Henry Landis, somewhere out in Montgomery County. You might want to look him up, and I might, if I can find his contact information. So we contacted Henry with the Delaware Valley Family Business Center. We met a few times, and then we finalized the business transition between my father and my generation. And then we spent the next, 10 years working through the aftermath of that. So our story is a bit backwards. It's kind of like a shotgun wedding, and then you do the premarital counseling and all of those other things afterwards. So as we think about the future from here, we're really excited to work with folks like these professionals and other advisors that can help us educate and prepare for any potential next generation transition, but hopefully start working on that earlier. So that's how we came to work with both of these folks, and have had a good and fruitful relationship. Peter picking up where his father left off. So we all have some family business perspective there.
Peter, so most of your clients, are they the entrepreneur who started the business, or are they second or third generation? And the topic above that is, what should someone, if they're listening, look into? Like, if you don't know, you don't know. So what should they know, and how can they prepare themselves?
People that we tend to represent are across a wide gamut of experiences, industries, and understandings. We would represent both startup entrepreneurs, someone who's literally in their garage tinkering, to multi-generational family businesses that are now in third or even fourth or fifth generations of ownership. And we would represent hundreds of organizations and businesses actively in transition and in a whole variety of the life cycle of businesses. So I would regularly grapple with issues in one part of my day that are people who have never done business before and are just entering the market, to in the afternoon talking with a family who's in their third generation and talking about branching into new activities or new endeavors. So I appreciate that part of my work, is that it's always like popcorn popping up. I don't know what is going to be in the next bite. But I think what people should know about, if they're approaching this type of planning, is that it very much helps to encapsulate in some written understanding what are the assumptions that people bring to this conversation. Because just because they're family members does not mean that they necessarily share all values, and we certainly are not mind readers. So it usually helps to elicit what are the baseline understandings that people have about the business. Why are they in business? Why is the business a family business? And then what is the intention for those family members about how they look at the business? Is it a tool to acquire wealth and distribute wealth? Is it something to be sustained for the next generation, to also provide gainful employment and training and endeavor to the next generation? Is it some combination of those? Or is it something entirely different? And usually those founding assumptions, those starting points, informs our later decisions, because this is like a multi-level decision tree where, depending on where the client leads us, we go in a very different branch or bow.
I think as I think back to our experience, I was grateful for the folks we had at advising, but in hindsight, I don't think we had a lot of collaboration. Like at that time, we had people working in the financial area, people in the legal, and then too late for us to invite to the game was the family side, which we had a lot of ground to make up. So I think that value of having advisors that work together well and not just thinking, well, I'm going to have them work in silos. I think that's really important, whether it's at a transitional stage or it's, like you mentioned, a point of inflection where an established business is planning to go a different direction, try something new, deal with a new opportunity or challenge. And I just want to really affirm the value of having advisors working together to help guide. And I think sometimes we get caught up on save money. I'm paying 3 or 4 different folks, but I have developed this saying that sometimes it costs a lot of money to be cheap. And so that's a mindset that I would challenge our listeners to think about is, who do you have at the table that's collaborating, working together alongside, shoulder to shoulder, not sparring back and forth.
Well, the families that we work with are really, they're wonderful families, like the Brubacher family. They're not perfect, but they are pretty strong, and they have built pretty interesting, profitable businesses. Now, entrepreneurs vary a lot in how far they move the business, but succession planning should not be the first time people are looking at family business dynamics. That's about 10 years too late. Now, many do it that late, but one of our best clients called us when he was 49. And he said, I get this business stuff, and he really had developed an excellent business. But he said, I don't know what I don't know. And I would like you to help us to think about how we proceed. And so the framework that we use is that there are really 3 basic teams that have to be growing in order to sustain a multi-generational family business. Now, not everybody wants a multi-generational family business, but most of the clients who come to us, they're either first generation or second generation people who really do have a commitment to, maybe a 100-year program, like the Bergies Corporation in Montgomery County. They're a auto, truck, and tire dealership, and this is their 100th year. So if you're going to achieve that kind of long-term success, you got to have a really strong family. You got to have a really strong business, and you really need a strong ownership group. Now, most families, enterprises, are stronger in one area than the other. And what I've noticed over the 35 years that I've worked with family businesses is that there's often much more energy put into the development of the business than into the development of the family. Mm-hmm. Okay, so I think about it, and this will fit here at Brubacher's. I grew up in a family that was kind of a pickup family. We had a nice pickup. I mean, it was a good, healthy family, good values, but we didn't really have the kind of family development that kept up with our business development. And that eventually will catch up with you. Now, when you hit succession time, you need a lot of family muscle. So we think about it as you're moving from a pickup family to an 18-wheeler family, a family that can handle a lot more conflict, can handle a lot more frustration, and can handle and are willing to invest in education. Now, Brubachers have been very faithful members of our Family Business Forum, which is a group of 50 to 75 companies in the southeastern Pennsylvania, Delaware, New Jersey area who gather 4 or 5 times a year to learn from each other, essentially. So we bring in speakers who talk about their experience. It's much like this kind of event today, where people kind of can look down the road a little bit about what is happening in the future that I got to be prepared for. Yesterday, I was meeting with a fifth generation family member who's young, who I was trying to help him to understand how the business is going to look very different in 20 years, which is going to be the kind of the core of his contribution than it does today. And how is he going to prepare himself? And how is he going to prepare the business and the ownership mountain, as we call them, to handle the complexity of a company that's probably going to be several $1 billion in sales and many employees. So the more successful you become, the more family muscle you need, the more business management muscle you need, and very important, I think most importantly, you need owners who are committed, aligned, and active. Whether they work in the business is really, I don't think, that important. I think some of them need to, but ownership is where the power and the authority and really the leadership needs to come from. So we work at the family relationships, at the business relationships, and the ownership. And ultimately, most businesses like Brubacher are best served when they have outside advisors called independent directors who really help them to design the best possible family enterprise, tending to the family, to management, to ownership, and advisors. So we talk about 5 mountains that really need to be tended to.
Do you want to go over those 5 mountain points or the top 3 mountain points?
Well, I said you got to have a healthy family, a healthy management, and healthy ownership. Well, what's a healthy family? Well, I think John Davis, who is one of the kind of the big dogs in our profession, he talks about unified, industrious, and contributing families. Okay, they're unified. They're not the same. They can handle diversity, but they're industrious. They work hard. They study hard. They play hard, and they're contributing to each other, to their community, right, and to the business. Okay, so that's a strong family. Now, that will look different for everyone, but you're developing this family muscle, moving from a pickup truck, which is really nice, but really doesn't have the kind of maturity to handle a lot of the stuff that they're probably going to face in the future. So the management group, of course, they need to be capable, aligned, and very strategic in their thinking. And entrepreneurs often struggle with that, and they kind of run out of strategic gas. And so part of what we help families to think about, if they don't have outside boards or do not have well-developed management capacity within, is to help them to attract family and non-family managers like you, Chris, because no family can run the business without non-family people. So to attract and retain high-level management now, not at succession time, but way before succession time. So we think we provide the best value when companies call us 10 years or 15 years before moving ownership to anybody.
I would echo that also, Henry, that at least in my experience, not only myself, but other attorneys, I'm sure, would share the view that it is most satisfying to work with people who are strategic planners and not simply playing catch up too late, too much. That it's very, very typical for entrepreneurs to feel themselves to be immortal, and that the succession plan is when I keel over at my desk. And that kind of planning or lack of planning would really leave a family in the lurch if that business owner is no longer around. that if the business owner is truly being kind and graceful to the next operator of that family business, it would be wonderful for that currently operating generation of ownership to plan their own exit before the exit actually needs to occur, and indeed for that to happen years in advance, not just months or days in advance, but that these family businesses that endure across multiple generations, enduring multiple transfers of ownership, indeed, they are relying upon those types of independent experts that you mentioned, Henry. They are adjusting to the best practices of the time, that those best practices are learned, not simply evolved in-house, and that they then, in their plan of transition, they would contemplate things like, well, what is an appropriate price for the next generation to buy in at? Or should we be gifting a fair portion of ownership? Or is it a part sale, part gift to the next generation, so that there's some buy-in, some investment by the next generation, that they indeed are not just handed this on a silver platter, so to say, that they are invested themselves? Or is this going to be some transition that would be perhaps expanding the ownership group to include other non-family insiders or employees? Maybe some of those managers that you mentioned who are so essential to retain, sometimes those non-family employees are essential to carrying out a strategic plan that indeed would allow the family to continue to operate, would allow the family to continue in control, and the family would simply avoid the day where they would lose ownership of less than 51%, so that they at least have a controlling interest. But most successful family businesses that are transitioning over multiple generations indeed are learning constantly, and they are developing their plan as a family, not just as a business. So I would often see that those family businesses that are most successful have this as a process. They would regularly revisit the question of succession planning, that it is something that is done frequently and significantly, and that they are favoring the significant over the merely urgent. And the significant is what is planned when heads are cool. That is the best way to plan for significant things.
So, Peter, you talked a little bit about the tree of the company and how it has different branches. In the succession plan of the next generation and the younger generation, what if their thought process is not one of the elders, or they want to take the company to different directions? Is that a hard and fast, in the contract kind of a thing, or how do you prepare for something like that?
I think that the framework of different generations having different expectations is a very common framework. That indeed it's a rare person who is truly going to thrive in business that isn't prepared to be a little bit of a rebel, a little bit of a renegade, and want to shake things up in some way, whether that's just to exert their own personality or because they indeed believe there are structural problems or just significant irritations with some of the ways of how we've always done things. That's how we do it, and that's how we're going to keep doing it. The approach that I would suggest for people who are in that rising generation of how they could have their proposed changes not fall on deaf ears, not to simply create a detente situation where the older generation does not appreciate what's brought in, is if they have, as a new rising generation, if they have the benefit of education, particularly if they've gotten a business degree or a graduate degree, that would be in some area of expertise relevant to the business. So if the family business is in biological sciences, they don't necessarily have to have an MBA, but maybe they have a trained biologist who knows the subject matter very, very well. A lot of the family businesses that we would work with have the equivalent of a graduate education in the specific area of the family's business, even without outside intervention. Just by having worked in the family business for a decade or more, starting perhaps as a young teen in a family business, those rising generation family members really know their way around things and can really navigate most of the day-to-day experiences. But it's when they're framing some kind of significant transition or encountering some need for a shake-up to make it work that it really calls into question whether they have the education that would be relevant to that particular next challenge. And so I often would confide in my clients, try to push your younger family members to get outside experience beyond the family business. Work in one or two related businesses, ideally even competitor businesses if they would tolerate it, but find another outside experience. And if you can't find it in your own industry, then even in an unrelated industry, just to have some other skills to bring to the table, because if it's kind of like dating before marriage. A person who has never dated except the person they're marrying may have some second thoughts in marriage as to whether they made the best choice. But if they've had some experience in dating and getting to know other people, particularly in a family business, getting to know other businesses, that is very helpful to evaluate whether they're going to then be satisfied remaining in the family business and planting their tree in that family business as their main professional endeavor or their main outlet. I think that it's very valuable to have outside intelligence from beyond the family business because it helps you to evaluate your own business. It helps you to see where that family business could improve. And it also helps you to understand the methods of communication and the things of significance to those who are not in your immediate family, so that it broadens your experience. In my own experience, I've learned multiple languages by study and then by living abroad. And in my experience, it was only when I started to have experiences outside of English that I really understood English, that my own language wasn't fully realized to me until I compared it against other languages. So similarly, in family business, if you can speak another business language and bring that language back into your own family business, you will make this blossom as a family business.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more with the value of that. And at the same time, I'll acknowledge I've grown up really alongside of this business. My dad started a year before I was born, and so I've grown up alongside it. And that's one of the things that I didn't do was work outside of the business, but I see the value of that. And my brother and I, as co-shareholders and owners, have decided, long before anybody's children came of working age, that was something we were going to require if they wanted to work in the business outside of part-time during high school or college. But I think that is so important because, frankly, for me, there was a lot of years where I really wondered, am I really good on the market? Dad did my reviews, told me I was doing a good job, threw me into things I wasn't qualified for, and then allowed me to learn. But there was always that question nagging in the back of my mind, do I have what it takes to support my family, to provide meaning and value to the people whom I serve? Now, there was a series of very challenging events that I don't spend time asking that question anymore. But I think that it's so important to have that perspective. So for the Brubacher family, we've required the next generation, if they have interest in the business, they got to work outside for 3 years and earn at least one promotion. I think there's value in knowing that I am promotable and I can gain skill. I have to work for something to do that. So now we do have one member who's asking if the golf tour, National Golf Tour, Championship Tour qualifies as outside experience and whether advancing to the next level qualifies as a promotion. So we'll see. I don't think that quite fits what we had in mind, but we have to talk about that. But the other thing, Peter, you were mentioning was about the change in approaches from different generations. One of the things that come to mind that, as you were talking about that I wish I knew before I got into this role was how that many tactics or approaches that worked well for the entrepreneur founder, my father, Ben, and worked very, very well for him, that either I had learned from him or tried to emulate, even if they didn't come naturally to me, and many of them didn't work or wouldn't work in a different environment, decades later. And so trying to sort through what is helpful, what do I need to carry forward, that this is part of our DNA, who we are as a culture and our values and how we operate, and what do I need to move beyond and do differently. That took time to sort out. I think that's probably a long time process, but I think the most intense of that was like the first even 10 years of serving as leader here. So that's something that I'd encourage folks to think about is what do I bring with me? And what do I need to be okay to let go, even if it baffles your parent or the founding generation as to how you could possibly run a great business without knowing who's moving the D8 tomorrow morning and where it went, and learning to be okay with, I don't know, and your father saying, well, how can that be? Shouldn't you know that? No, I shouldn't. I have competent people that can manage that.
I'd like to say a little bit about family members and their growth. Like, there are always some family members who are attracted to the business and they fit right in. But there are other family members who they don't fit in the business. But the family needs to pay attention to every single child and help that child to become successful in their own right. And working in the business is not necessarily good for them or the business. Mm-hmm. But if you don't tend to each family member being successful and becoming well-functioning adults, irrespective, I don't think people should be trapped into the family business. I think, frankly, my two older brothers, it's the only thing they saw. And they were very successful in the business, but they really, I call it the slippery slope. It's just really easy. Like, Keith, you were good at mechanical stuff, right? And you enjoyed the work, and so you fell right into it. And it's very important that families early develop a family employment policy, which really focuses on what's good for the family member as much as it focuses on what's good for the business. Now, getting outside experience is very good for the business, but it's fundamentally very good for the family member because they find out who they are. They develop a kind of psychological or a sense of growing up, whether it's college or outside work experience. People need to leave the nest. Family businesses, people never really grow up because dad really has control over them, and then people are struggling with that. So outside work experience is really kind of the last chapter of the family employment policy. The first chapter is, okay, you're 8 years old. What are you good at? Where do your natural interests go? And when you're a teenager, what are your interests? And our clients like to do assessments with kids pretty early to help them be successful, not on behalf of the family business, but on behalf of their values. And in many of our clients are Christians who are as concerned about the kingdom of God as they are of their own family business. So the business gets a lot of attention in a family business, and the family needs to have equal attention, and the ownership and preparing people for ownership is very important as well. The business generally will take care of itself through management development. We hire people to do that. But the family needs, in most cases, outside support and accountability to make sure that the business doesn't cover up the family.
Yeah, and I think that's so challenging where, if you're not careful about what hats you're wearing, the 4th of July picnic becomes a management report out on what's going on, and the Sunday afternoon dinner becomes another update on what's happening with the strategic plan update. And the business really can envelop the family if you're not careful. And I certainly lived through some of that, but I learned a lot through it, so no hard feelings. Peter, I'm curious, could you share just a bit about your decision process to join the family firm and essentially in many ways follow in your father's footsteps? Now, you did have some experience abroad, but maybe just tell us a little bit about that decision process, and then I'd be curious, Henry, for your response to that. You mentioned, again, having grown up under the influence of a family business. So, Peter?
Well, one of my earliest memories about career choice and what I would do as an adult was my father actively seeking to discourage me from becoming an attorney. He said, Peter, there are so many things you can do. You don't need to take the aggravation and the stress and the grief that in his own estimation, his professor in law school had also reinforced this to say that the practice of law is so stressful that according to that professor's belief, he had actively shortened his own life by several years because of the sheer degree of stress that it entails. So I was actively discouraged from practicing law, not because my father didn't believe I could handle it, but because my father wanted me to be a well-rounded person, a grounded person, someone who is seeking beyond just the pursuit of law or of business success. So I do affirm my father's desire to seek to raise me and my two sisters as well-functioning adults, regardless of what the family business, so to speak, would need. And I was encouraged to pursue other pursuits. So some of those other pursuits that I did, I worked as a journalist for the Lancaster newspapers during all of my breaks in college for about 2.5 years. I framed houses in a construction crew with Horst & Son Construction for 2 summers. I worked in an orchard for Roots Nurseries south of Mannheim from the age of 13 to about 17. And then after I went to college, where I majored in English and journalism, not expecting to study law, not expecting to go to law school, I worked in different businesses. I did a brief internship with an architecture firm. And then after graduation, I went to Indonesia and taught English for Mennonite Central Committee in Indonesia for a year. And it was only when I was in Indonesia that I actually submitted an application to go to law school. And I only submitted one application to one law school, Dickinson Law. And fortunately, I got in and was accepted. And I went to Dickinson thinking that I would consider practicing law, but perhaps I would do something in business that wasn't directly advocating for clients. However, I did very well in law school. I got a clerkship with a judge and then a second clerkship with a bankruptcy judge. And I was really interested in how this intersection of business and law worked. So I did indeed practice law, but the first job I had as an attorney was with a firm in Harrisburg that is a Pennsylvania firm that has regional offices outside of Pennsylvania as well, but predominantly Pennsylvania firm. Was not my own father's firm, was not Gibbel, Kraybill, and Hess. And then I married a woman in law school. My wife, Maria, is from Russia. And we returned to Russia for 2 years after I graduated from law school, after I had worked with a firm in Harrisburg. And I worked with Baker and McKenzie in Moscow, Russia, where they had 30 attorneys. And I worked under the former British ambassador to the Soviet Union, Paul Melling, and was encountering clients like Forbes and Boeing and major deals, one of which was a $4 billion oil field arbitration in The Hague that our side actually lost. We lost a $4 billion case. And I saw this from the very ground of the factory floor, so to speak. I was like dust on the factory floor. And it didn't really matter that I was there. It didn't matter the clients that I was there. They just needed the work done. And I had the sense that this is very, very consequential stuff. Huge dollars, more zeros behind the number than I regularly would see at any time later in my lifetime. But I ultimately thought I'd really like to be working with businesses where I actually can make a difference, where I actually have some impact at a human level or at a community level. And that's what ultimately called me back to Pennsylvania, called me back to Gibbel, Kraybill, and Hess, and to work with my dad, my father, Elvin Kraybill, and his partners. And he has given me, and they've given me, the flexibility to build a practice in corporate law and in trademarks specifically, and to bring the expertise that I brought from these international deals and these international exposure clients, and bring that to an audience and customer base and client base in Pennsylvania that has much smaller scale businesses. We would mostly represent businesses in the range of about $5 million to about $80 to $90 million in annual revenues. So it's not the Forbes and Boeings of the world, but it's very significant to the local community and to the owners. And I've really had a human connection with the people I work with. And I found this to be a much more life-giving enterprise than if I would have remained in Moscow or with Baker and McKenzie and one of the large law firms.
Appreciate that. Thank you for listening to the Brubacher and Beyond podcast. Please check back soon for part 2 of this episode.
Thanks for listening to the Brubacher podcast today. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe to our podcast so you can listen to the new episodes each month. Share it with your friends in the industry and those who might like to learn more about the construction industry. Feel free to check out our website at www.brubacher.net. I'm Keith Brubacher, president of Brubacher Excavating Incorporated, and we hope you found our discussion insightful, and we look forward to the next time together.